Welcome to The Better Part. Cupertino TV Productions and the League of Women Voters have been working together for a long time now to bring you election information, and we're delighted to continue the partnership in 2016. I'm Susan Huff, Vice President for Voter Education of the League of Women Voters of Cupertino, Sunnyvale, and I'm here with League President Elaine Manley to bring you information about the upcoming election on November 8th. Because of the number of ballot measures in this election, we've divided this show into two parts. The first one features the criminal justice propositions, and the second the financial ones. Propositions 62, 66, 57, 63, 64, 54, 60, and 58 will be covered in this segment, while the rest will be discussed in part 2. So let's start with the election calendar. Can you give us the basics?
Yes, to vote on Tuesday, November 8th, you must be registered by October 24th. And if you need to re-register because you've moved, or if you're no longer in prison or on parole for a felony, just go straight to registertovote.ca.gov and fill out the form online. It's very simple. If you're voting by mail, your ballot must be postmarked by the election day, but earlier is better. You can also drop off your ballot at any polling place in the county on election day before the polls close at 8 p.m. Now, before we get to the meat of the propositions, I'd like to remind viewers that we are here as a service of the League of Women Voters Education Fund to give an unbiased explanation of the propositions, including the pros and the cons of each, and the difference it will make to you. The League of Women Voters was founded in 1920 by some of the people working for women's suffrage, with the aim of making sure that when women did get the right to vote, they would exercise it thoughtfully and responsibly. Thoughtful, responsible voters are still our aim, though we've made a few changes over the years. For one thing, the League of Women Voters does accept men despite the name. We keep the name because we're proud of it and of our history, but men have been able to be full members for many years. You can join as soon as you turn 16. The League always benefits by having more voices, and we'd welcome yours. At the end of this program, we'll show you how to contact your local league. At the League of Women Voters, we are passionate about informed voters and about all kinds of people working together to shape public policy, and the men and women of the League take our educational responsibilities very seriously. The League does sometimes advocate for policies, although never for candidates. But when we come here from the League of Women Voters Education Fund, we are not here as advocates, unless we're advocates for thoughtful voting. We don't care whether you vote for or against these propositions. We just want you to understand what your options are so you can choose what matters to you. We will let you know who will be speaking out for and against propositions, but since we tape this show very early in the election season, we're not going to know everyone who will support or oppose. At the end of this show, we will give you some websites for updated financial and endorsement information. Now on to the election. What's new this time around?
We have 17 propositions on the state ballot. All of them need a simple majority to pass. In this segment, we're going to focus on those that affect criminal law, and let's start with the big double of Propositions 62 and 66.
Now, why do you want to talk about two at once?
Propositions 62 and 66 are both on the same topic, in this case, the death penalty. So in California, first-degree murder with special circumstances can be punishable by death. First-degree murder is unlawful killing of a human being that is premeditated and deliberate, or that takes place during certain other crimes like kidnapping. Special circumstances are things like having a motive of financial gain, or if more than one murder is committed. California law calls for two-part trials when there's a possibility of the death penalty. The first part is where the defendant is judged guilty of murder with special circumstances or not guilty. The second trial then determines whether the sentence is life imprisonment or death. All death sentences are automatically appealed to the California Supreme Court. These are called direct appeals, and they focus on whether the trial was conducted according to the rules. But defendants will also often file other appeals called habeas corpus appeals to the California Supreme Court and then possibly to federal courts. Those might cover, was the defense counsel effective? Was there information the jury didn't hear that might have led them to a different decision? For every one of those trials and appeals, the defendant needs an attorney. And if the defendant can't afford an attorney, the state will appoint one. These attorneys have to meet standards that are established by the Judicial Council. The appeals take a long time. Of the 930 people who've been sentenced to death in California since 1978, when the death penalty was instituted, 15 have been executed, while 103 have died of natural causes. 64 have had their sentences reduced by the courts. 748 remain on death row. The delays are caused by many things, including the wait to have an attorney assigned and for a case to be heard by the courts. Death penalty prisoners are housed under tighter security than other prisoners and in separate cells, so they are more expensive to imprison.
So if that's how it is today, would a Proposition 62 and 66 change?
If Proposition 62 passes, the death penalty would no longer exist in California. The maximum sentence available would be life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. Everybody currently sentenced to death would have their sentences changed to life imprisonment without parole. Appeals would be moved from the state Supreme Court down to the courts of appeal or the trial courts for those appeals that don't directly have to do with the death penalty itself. Proposition 62 also requires that people found guilty of murder work while they're in prison and have up to 60% of their pay deducted to pay any debts that they owe to victims of crime. But there are other regulations that govern prison labor. Those are not changed by this proposition, so in reality that clause might not make much difference. Proposition 62 is itself quite similar to Proposition 34, which was defeated in 2012.
And Prop 66?
66 addresses that backlog of death penalty cases from the other direction. If Proposition 66 passes, the appeals process will happen much, much faster. Some appeals will be heard in local court, not the state Supreme Court. There would be time limits on legal challenges, including that appeals must be completed within 5 years. The process to appoint attorneys would change in order to expand the number of attorneys that can represent condemned inmates. Like 62, 66 also specifies that those convicted of murder must work with up to 70% of their pay going to restitution, but does not itself change the state's work regulations. Finally, the measure allows the state to house death penalty prisoners in any prison. Financially, it's always hard to predict the future, but the LAO projects that Proposition 62 would likely result in net savings to the state and the counties of about $150 million a year within a few years. Proposition 66 is more difficult to model. It's likely there would be short-term trial cost increases to comply with the time constraints of the measure, and money that would otherwise have been spent over a longer time, and then some tens of millions of dollars in prison savings annually from eliminating that special death row housing. In general, since Propositions 62 and 66 are competing measures, if they both pass, the one that passes with more votes will go into effect and the other just won't. If there are any cases in which competing measures don't conflict and they both get a majority of yes votes, then they'll both be implemented to the extent that they can be possible. The courts will have the final say there.
Okay.
So who do we see talking about these propositions and what do they have to say?
Sure. Well, signing in favor of Prop 62, we see a former death row warden, an author of California's current death penalty law, and a relative of a murder victim. The proponents say that California's death penalty system has failed, and the risk of executing an innocent person is real. Proposition 62 replaces this costly failed system with a strict life sentence and zero chance of parole, allowing closure for the victims' families. Sorry.
What about the opponents?
Yeah. So the arguments against are signed by the San Bernardino County District Attorney, by Mark Klass, who's the father of a murder victim, and by the Peace Officers Research Association of California, which is also one of the major financial backers, along with the California Correctional Officers. They say we need to mend, not end the death penalty. There are no innocent inmates on California's death row. Prop 62 jeopardizes public safety, it denies closure to victims' families, and it rewards the most horrible killers.
And for Proposition 66?
Well, signing in favor of Prop 66 are LA District Attorney Jackie Lacey, Kerman Alexander, who is a victim's family member, and then the County Deputy Sheriff's Association, while the major donors are the same as those against Prop 62. They say the death penalty is reserved for the worst of the worst, and Prop 66 will speed up the death penalty appeals system while ensuring that no innocent person is ever executed. It protects public safety, it saves money, and it brings closure to the families of victims.
And against 66.
So former LA Mayor Villaraigosa signed the arguments along with an innocent man wrongly accused or wrongly convicted. The ACLU is a major contributor so far, and they say that Prop 66 is modeled after laws from states like Texas, where authorities have executed innocent people. It is vague and poorly written and could increase taxpayers' costs by millions. It will clog local courts and place high-profile cases in the hands of inexperienced judges and attorneys. So what's up next?
Proposition 57, it's on sentencing and juvenile justice. So inmates in state prisons may have been sentenced for multiple crimes, and there may also be sentencing modifiers, like that double sentence for a felony conviction when the defendant's already been convicted of a violent or serious felony. Most prisoners are eligible for credits for good behavior or participation in education or work programs, and those credits can reduce their time served. But because of California's prison crowding, some people who've not been convicted of violent crimes are actually eligible for parole consideration after they've served half their sentence. Juveniles are currently tried in juvenile court except if they're older youth, if they have a significant criminal history, or if the crime is especially grievous. The move to adult court might be after a hearing in juvenile court, it might be at the discretion of the prosecutor, or is mandatory for some crimes. Proposition 57 changes the Constitution to increase the number of inmates eligible for parole and consideration. It increases opportunities for credit for good behavior, as well as the number of inmates who are eligible for credits. And it requires juveniles to have a hearing in the juvenile court before they can be tried in adult court. Prop 57 increases eligibility for parole hearings by making people who are convicted of nonviolent felonies eligible for consideration after they've served the full term for their primary offense. So that's before they've served any time for other crimes or for those sentencing enhancements. The measure doesn't define a nonviolent offense. One interpretation is everything but those crimes that are specifically defined in law as violent. What do people have to say about 57?
Well, signing in favor is Governor Brown, the probation officers of California, and some relatives of victims of violent crimes, with money from Governor Brown's Ballot Measures Committee and the Democratic Party. They say Prop 57 focuses resources on keeping dangerous criminals behind bars while rehabilitating inmates and saving tens of millions of dollars. Without a common-sense long-term solution, we'll continue to waste billions of dollars and risk a court-ordered release of dangerous prisoners. Now, in opposition, we see the San Francisco Police Officers Association and the Association of Los Angeles Deputies Sheriffs and the California District Attorneys Association, and some relatives of victims of violent crimes. And they say weakening the California's anti-crime laws has gone too far. California's Constitution should not be amended to give more rights to criminals. Proposition 57 treats people convicted of rape by intoxication and assault with a deadly weapon as nonviolent and eligible for early parole. Now, next we have Prop 63. What does it look like?
So right now, state and federal laws prevent some people from owning guns. This includes people who've committed felonies as well as some other crimes, certain people with mental illness, and those with a restraining order against them. People who buy a gun must also get a background check through the Department of Justice. No background check is currently required to buy ammunition, although that will change beginning in January 2017. So 63 would create, if passed, a new court process to make sure people convicted of felonies and some other crimes don't have guns. Courts would be required to tell offenders they need to get rid of their guns, and probation officers would be required to make sure they've complied. People could turn their guns into police, store them with a gun dealer, or sell them to a gun dealer. Proposition 63 would also make it illegal to possess certain types of gun magazines or clips that hold a large number of bullets. What do we hear people saying about 63?
Sure. Well, Prop 63 supporters include Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom, joined by Senator Feinstein and the Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence. The financial support so far comes from the Democratic Party and Lieutenant Governor Newsom. They say it's time to keep guns and ammo out of the wrong hands while protecting the rights of law-abiding citizens in California to own guns for self-defense, hunting, and recreation. Prop 63 will save lives by closing loopholes to prevent dangerous criminals, domestic abusers, and the dangerously mentally ill from obtaining and obtaining and using deadly weapons. Now, the opponents include the California State Sheriff's Association, the California Reserve Peace Officers Association, and the Coalition for Civil Liberties. They say Prop 63 will burden law-abiding citizens without keeping violent criminals or terrorists from accessing weapons or ammunition. New York recently abandoned enforcement of a similar proposal after it was passed, finding it was impossible to implement. So what's next?
Moving on to Proposition 64, we're likely to see a lot of conversation around marijuana legalization. Since 1996, it's been legal for California residents of any age to grow and use marijuana for medical purposes if they have a doctor's recommendation. It is not presently legal to grow, process, possess, or use marijuana for non-medical or recreational purposes. If Proposition 64 passes, it will make it legal to grow, possess, or use marijuana for adults 21 years of age and older. Growing and using marijuana could be done in a private home or in a business that's licensed for marijuana use, but not in areas visible to the public. Businesses growing and selling non-medical marijuana would be regulated. There would be limits on the amount a person could possess for individual use, about an ounce of marijuana, 6 plants. Excise taxes would be set for retail sales and on growers of non-medical marijuana. Money from those excise taxes would pay for things like youth programs, environmental protection, and drug education efforts, while sales tax revenues, because legal sales will incur sales tax, unlike illegal sales, would go to local governments and into the state's general fund. People who've been convicted previously of marijuana-related crimes would be eligible to apply for reduced sentences and have their records changed. The costs of Proposition 64 and how much money it would raise are unclear. The amount coming in from taxes depends on how much non-medical marijuana is grown and purchased through the new legal system. Over time, state and local governments could earn taxes in the hundreds of millions of dollars or more than $1 billion each year. The state and local governments could also save tens of millions of dollars on court and law enforcement costs each year. So, who's supporting and opposing this?
Sure. The signers of supporting arguments for Prop 64 include the Parents for Addiction Treatment and Healing, a member of the Blue Ribbon Commission on Marijuana Policy, and some law enforcement and health professionals, with funding from Sean Parker and the New Approach PAC. They say Prop 64 would set up a safe, legal system that allows adults to use recreational marijuana. Drug dealers don't ask for proof of age, and 64 includes the toughest in the nation protections for children. Now, Prop 64 would bring in more than $1 billion each year and lower state courts' costs, according to them. Now, the signers against include the California Association of Highway Patrolmen, Senator Feinstein, and the California Hospital Association, with funding from the California Public Safety Institute. They say Prop 64 would increase the illegal drug trade and hurt low-income families or communities. Prop 64 allows marijuana to be grown near schools, and it puts youth at risk of addiction. It would increase stone driving without creating a standard for assessing DUI for marijuana. So, what's next?
Well, we're starting to run out of criminal justice propositions. We're into miscellaneous now. Proposition 54 is on how the legislature works. State laws are introduced as bills, and they're voted on in the state legislature. Lawmakers debate and make changes to a bill. The process normally takes several days to weeks, but sometimes there are sudden changes in a bill right before a vote. Many bills are available online, but sometimes the bill would not be posted for the public to see until close to the time that lawmakers vote on it. Many, but not all, public meetings of the legislature are recorded and those posted online. But if Proposition 54 passes, then the legislature would be required to put bills in print and post them online for 72 hours before voting on them. And all public meetings of the legislature would be recorded and posted online within 24 hours. Any person would also be allowed to record public meetings of the legislature. It would put these changes into the California Constitution. What do people have to say about this measure?
Well, in support, we see the League of Women Voters of California, the California Chamber of Commerce, and the California Common Cause, with financial support from Charles Munger, Jr. They say that a bill every legislature and every California has had 72 hours to read will be a better bill than one that they haven't. Now, Prop 54 will create a more open, honest, and accountable government. 69 California cities and 37 county boards of supervisors already post their recordings of their meetings online. Our legislature should catch up. Now, in opposition, we have Californians for an Effective Legislature, we have the California National Organization of Women, and retired State Senator Art Torres. And they say Prop 54 is a complicated measure that introduces unnecessary restrictions on the way laws are actually crafted. It empowers special interests, and it will slow down the legislators' abilities to develop bipartisan solutions to our state's most pressing problems. All right, so 2 more to go this segment. What do we have?
Proposition 60. It's on the adult film industry in California. So many adult films and other types of pornography are made in California. The state has laws in place to make sure that people are safe and protected while at work. These laws also apply to adult film producers and actors. Safety regulations currently require performers to use condoms during sex on adult film sets to prevent HIV, AIDS, and other diseases. If the State Office of Workplace Safety gets a complaint, companies that don't follow that rule may be fined. In 2014, Los Angeles also passed a local law requiring condoms in adult films. Under Proposition 60, adult film producers would be required to make sure condoms are used while filming vaginal and anal sex. Adult film producers would be required to get a license and provide information to the state about their film shoots. These requirements would apply to pornography produced by film studios, but also by individual performers or couples. The state's workplace safety agency would have more time to investigate and fine adult film producers that don't use condoms. California residents would also be allowed to sue adult film producers for not using condoms if the state failed to take action. Who's for and against this one?
Well, the supporters include the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, which is also the major donor, a former director from the LA County Sexually Transmitted Disease Program, and a professor at the UCLA School of Medicine. They're saying Prop 60 closes the loopholes in the existing law and improves enforcement so that the adult film industry is held to the same workplace protection laws that applies to every other Californian industry, and that Prop 60 is supported by numerous medical and public health organizations. The opponents include the Adult Performer Advocacy Committee, a former chair of the California OSHA Board, and both the Democratic and Republican parties. And they say Prop 60 is opposed by numerous civil rights and public health organizations and business leaders. It allows everyone in California to file a lawsuit against an adult film producer and distributors. All right, 1 more to go in this segment. What is in Prop 58?
Okay. Proposition 58 is on English language education. More than 20% of California students are considered English learners. These students have a hard time reading, writing, or speaking in English. Under current law, the state requires schools to teach those students primarily in English. State law limits the use of bilingual programs, which teach students using both English and their native language. So, as a result, very few schools offer bilingual programs. If Proposition 58 passes, schools would no longer be required to teach English learners in English-only programs. Schools would be allowed to use bilingual programs to teach English based on the needs of their students. School districts would have to get feedback from parents about how their English learners should be taught.
Well, signing in favor are the California Federation of Teachers, the California School Boards Association, and the California Language Teachers Association. They say Prop 58 ensures all students can achieve English proficiency as soon as possible. It allows schools to use the most up-to-date methods to help our children learn, restores local control to our schools, and expands opportunities for English speakers to learn a second language. Now, in opposition, English for the Children and the founding president of the California Association of Bilingual Educators say this repeals the requirements that students be taught in English in California public schools. So Prop 227, English for the Children, it worked, and now bilingual activists are trying to trick voters into allowing the restoration of Spanish almost-only classes.
Well, that is it for statewide measures for this segment. What else do our people need to know?
Well, we'd like you to know that the League of Women Voters has speakers like us available before every statewide election. We make presentations on ballot measures throughout the community, at libraries, neighborhood associations, and other organizations. If you would like to schedule a presentation for your group, go to the League of Women Voters of California website at ca.lwv.org and click on Find a Local League, and your local league will be happy to arrange a speaker for your group. We will be continuing to make presentations up to Election Day, November 8th.
I would also like to remind our viewers about the unbiased online voter information guide from the League of Women Voters Education Fund and MapLight. It's called Voters Edge California. It can be found at votersedge.org/ca. By typing in your address, you get a personalized ballot, candidate and measure information for local, state, and federal contests, campaign finance facts for state candidates and measures, videos on the propositions, news and events, links to your local registrar's office, and a voting info section with everything you ever wanted to know about elections. And now the site's even available in Spanish. For busy or new voters who want a quick summary of the propositions and some voting nuts and bolts, check out the Easy Voter Guide, found in libraries and community centers and at easyvoterguide.org. Also the Legislative Analyst's Office website at lao.ca.gov offers information on many aspects of California government, as well as its finances. The Secretary of State's site at sos.ca.gov offers online voter registration, along with a lot of election information for current and past elections. This is also where you can look between elections to see what propositions might turn up in future elections. League of Women Voters of California Education Fund site, cavotes.org, offers a host of useful links about registration, balloting, info, and finally, your local Registrar of Voters site has everything you ever wanted to know about local measures and voting on your area. But however you decide, please look at your choices, spend a while understanding them, and then vote your priorities. We're making law here, law that we all have to live with, and it's worth doing this job right. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you to The Better Part for making this program possible. Please tune in next week for part 2 of the statewide ballot measures.